Okay, I need to tell you a story today. We're going to do Kepler's 3 laws of planetary motion. But first, I need to give you some background. And the background goes back to the second century, really. In the second century, scientists, philosophers were what they were called then, decided that the Earth the universe was geocentric. So this isn't really Kepler's 3 laws, this is background. Geocentric, meaning that it was Earth, geo is Earth, so Earth-centered. They believed that everything revolved around the Earth, and they believed it because if they looked up to the sky in the daytime, they could see the sun move across the sky. If they looked up in the nighttime, they could see the moon move across the sky. If they stood there long enough, they could see the stars move across the sky. It was clear that everything was revolving around the Earth. This was proposed in the second century and lasted 1400 years. Now, there's a few other things you need to know about that time, such as that was a time when people were, I'm going to say, superstitious, even in their faith. And they had certain beliefs about God that they knew were right, even though they didn't necessarily have a lot of foundation. And the church and state were very much one. So if the church said something, the state would support it. And if the state said something, the church would support it. So if you were in trouble with one, you were in trouble with the other. And if you were in good with one, you were in good with the other. That becomes important around 1543 when two scientists, Copernicus and Galileo, which I'm thinking you heard of, Copernicus and Galileo. Too bad I can't spell Galileo. Galileo. I think the E goes here. They suggested that rather than the model of the universe to be geocentric, that it was heliocentric. Heliocentric. Helio means sun. So they're suggesting that it's sun-centered, that everything revolves around the sun. Now, if you know any of your history, you would know that they got thrown in jail for saying that, because it was viewed as heresy, which is like speaking against God. Because obviously God would create the universe, the creator of the universe would put the earth, put people in the middle, and make everything revolve around us. Now, really that says more about our sense of self and our egos than it does about the one who created the universe. But back then they believed it to be true that, if you didn't put the earth in the middle, then you were somehow slamming God. So they threw these two guys in prison and said, if you don't take it back when you die, you're going to go straight to hell, like you're going to be... Copernicus was the older man, and so Copernicus actually did recant on his deathbed, or before his deathbed. He said he did recant because he felt that prison would probably kill him. But then on his deathbed, just before he was dying, he supposedly made a comment like, "And yet I know the sun is in the center." All of this to say that at that time, then, after Copernicus and Galileo's heliocentric model, lots of people began to try to figure out, okay, what are the things that we see in the sky doing? They tried to come up with a model of the universe. And it was before, of course, telescopes. So, this is easier said than done. And there's one man who you probably have not heard of. His name is Tycho Brahe, and he's an astronomer, was a rich Danish nobleman. So he's from Denmark, was from Denmark. He was in the upper class. He was good friends with the king, so he was used to, having everything. Well, nobility back then was a huge thing, so he would have had servants, and they would have been treated like royalty, and he very much liked that. He was perhaps a little bit eccentric, maybe a little bit like a Sheldon Cooper, like not always well-rounded. Anyway, so there's a story about when he was in college, he got in a duel, a sword fight with another nobleman about which one was smarter. And the other guy cut off Tycho's nose. And because Tycho had all kinds of money, he had another nose fashioned for himself out of gold. So he was known then for the rest of his life to have this gold nose. Anyway, so Tycho was an astronomer, and so he built a huge observatory on his estate, sunk a ton of money into it, and every night for like 40 years, he went to that observatory and he plotted the sky. His idea was that if he plotted all the stars and the planets for a long enough period of time, he'd be able to figure out what they were doing. So every night for 40 years, before the telescope, he would study and plot the position of the planets and the stars. But towards the end of that 40 years, the Danish monarchy was overthrown. And if you're in good with the monarchy and they get overthrown, it means you're in trouble. So Tycho and his family had to pack up everything they could and leave the country. And they fled to what would have then been Czechoslovakia. I'm not sure if it's present-day Slovakia they ended up in or present-day Czech Republic, but somewhere in there. Now, the problem is he's no longer nobility because the monarchy that he was in good with is gone, and he left a lot of his wealth in his estate and couldn't take his observatory with him. And he's now 40 years older and hasn't yet found the model that he was looking for the planets and the stars. So he realizes he's in trouble and running out of time because he's now becoming an older man and he can't really get a lot of good data anymore. So he hires a young guy who really is everything that Tycho is in. They're like polar opposites. This young guy is Johannes Kepler. Johannes Kepler grew up poor. He would have been in the lowest class. Stories are told that he had to like steal for food and was always in trouble. Nothing was handed to him easily, and he really despised the nobility who had everything handed to them on a silver platter. Tycho, because he was nobility and important in the state, was very much religious and bought into that whole anything the religion said must be true and anything the state said, like one supported the other. Kepler was not at all religious. He was the exact opposite. Actually, Kepler had a couple of aunts that were burnt at the stake for being witches, and his mother was found to be guilty to be a witch, but her life was spared because he was such an up-and-coming young mathematician. Kepler was a mathematician, whereas Tycho was an astronomer. So Tycho hires Kepler to help him because he realizes he needs someone to look at the data that maybe can figure it out before Tycho runs out of time. But he doesn't trust Kepler. They don't like each other from the beginning. And he doesn't trust that if he gives Kepler access to all the data, that Kepler won't figure it out and take all the credit for himself. So he only gives Kepler one piece. I think it was the piece with what Mars was doing is what Tycho allowed Kepler to see. And of course, this caused more issues between them. Kepler kept saying, it's like you don't trust me. Tycho kept saying yes. It's like you treat me like a paid servant. Tycho kept saying yes. Over and over again, they argued, as they worked on this. So somewhere in there, about a year after Kepler came to work for Tycho, Tycho got invited to a state dinner in the new country where he was, and he was all excited because he thought maybe this was his chance to begin to be treated again like the nobility that he really was. So he goes to the state dinner with the king, and he's very careful about following protocol, and there's food and wine, and all is great. And then he needs to go to the bathroom. He needs to pee. But he knows he can't get up and do that until the king gets up, because that would be like a huge breach of protocol. So he needs to pee, but can't. And so finally, at the end of the night, when the monarch rises, he runs to pee. But what happens is he dies later that night. And on his death certificate, the cause of death was because he didn't go to relieve himself soon enough. Part 2 coming soon.